Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys, depending with wherever you are watching me from. So, guys, we have some latest updates concerning the affirmative action, which was struck down last week by the Supreme Court, guys. So, a complaint was filed with the Department of Education by a legal activist group representing three Massachusetts-based Black and Latino organizations, where they requested that the Education Department end the practice of legacy admissions, stating that it discriminates against applications of color and violates the Civil Rights Act. So I have collected a few videos, guys, for you concerning this topic in question, which is, of course, legacy admissions. So, guys, please let me know what you think about this entire video after watching these videos, guys. So let's just get into the videos.
You have to be out of your mind if you can say with your whole chest that you think affirmative action should be struck down for fairness reasons, right? Because we should live in a meritocracy, without also having the same conviction, the same passion, the same belief that legacy admissions should be done away with too. But that's exactly what Edward Blum did, the man behind the Supreme Court decision that made affirmative action unconstitutional in universities across America. And I'm about to read him for fucking filth, because he might have won in the court of law, but I'm gonna make sure that the internet knows how much of a loser he actually is. Now, Edward Blum is not a student. He's not a lawyer. He's not the head of an organization. He's just a man who is so horny, so committed to ending affirmative action that he's been at this for the last 3 decades. Homeboy has filed more than 24 lawsuits against affirmative action practices and, just for funsies, voting rights legislation as well. And his whole shtick is that affirmative action is racism and we should live in a meritocracy, unfair. Okay, if you were that concerned about fairness, you would have gone after legacy admissions first, as no group stands to benefit more from university admission preferences than white people. Almost every elite colleges give significant legs up to children of alumni, athletes, faculty, and donors, collectively known as ALDCs. And according to data produced by the plaintiffs in this very suit, Harvard admitted 34% of legacy applicants compared to an overall admissions rate of 4.6%. About 43% of white students at Harvard are ALDC, okay? So this is not about fairness, this is about white supremacy. And if you don't think it is, let me change your mind. In 2016, Edward Blum found a young woman by the name of Abigail Fisher to be the face of his latest lawsuit against affirmative action. Abigail Fisher sued the University of Texas for being unfairly rejected because she was the wrong color. Now, it's true that students with lower scores than Abigail got in. However, according to ProPublica, only 5 of those students were Black or Hispanic. Do you want to know how many white students with worse grades than Abigail got into the University of Texas that year? 42. Do you want to know how many students with as good grades or better grades than Abigail who were Black or Hispanic didn't get in that year at the University of Texas? 168. Edward Blum knew this and chose to admit it. Do you understand what I mean now, that this is not about reverse racism, this is about white supremacy? Now, this time around, Edward Blum chose to make Asian Americans the face of his latest lawsuit against affirmative action. That's right. He decided, let's not pit the whites against the non-whites, let's pit the minorities against the minorities. And it worked. The argument that was made was that Black, Indigenous, and Latinx students were essentially stealing the spots of white and Asian American students, conveniently ignoring that trust fund babies and Nepo babies are the biggest fucking culprits. You're done, Edward. You cannot convince me for a second that you give a fuck about fairness. You cannot convince me that you give a fuck about Asian Americans. You are simply mad because you don't think that white people should have to suffer for the wrongdoings of previous generations. And if you want to believe that, that's fine. But what you need to accept is that white people cannot continue to benefit from the wrongdoings of previous generations. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. So what do we do now? I think the smartest thing for Harvard to do, and I think for universities to do in general, is to abolish legacy admissions. I think that we should send the message that, okay, if white people shouldn't be at a disadvantage for the generational trauma that has been inflicted on underrepresented minorities, they shouldn't stand to benefit from it either. If universities don't do this, I mean, That's fucking embarrassing.
Landscape of college admissions is not only changing in terms of affirmative action, it might now be changing in terms of legacy admissions. Harvard recently received a complaint about its legacy admission system, and I don't think you knew about that, so let me fill you in. Bit of background, what are legacy admissions? Legacy admissions are when an institution favors an applicant because of familial ties with their alumni. What I mean by that is I'm a Harvard applicant, theoretically. My mum went to Harvard, my dad went to Harvard, my grandparents went to Harvard, my great-grandparents went to Harvard. Because of all those people in my family that have gone to Harvard, Harvard loves me as an applicant. And they're more likely to admit me than someone whose parents didn't go to Harvard. They might even be willing to overlook your not the best credentials to do so. That's legacy admissions. It's always been controversial, now cut to today. A civil rights group in Boston filed a complaint with the Department of Education about Harvard's legacy admission system. They basically said that Harvard is accepting numerous white applicants on the basis of their familial ties to the university rather than their credentials. They also went on to say that credentials such as academics and extracurriculars weren't making a large part of why those students got into Harvard. It was more to do with their legacy. The civil rights group spoke on the behalf of Black and Latino communities from around New England. After the affirmative action ruling, this is causing a storm, particularly because in the wake of the affirmative action ruling, a lot of people were looking at that and thinking, what about legacy? Legacy is unfair. Why aren't we doing anything about that? This goes any further than just a complaint. Maybe it goes to the courts, maybe it goes to the Supreme. We could see a complete eradication of legacy. Or not, we could see legacy stand its ground. Only time will tell. Stay informed.
Just to add on that, guys, I think it can only be fair and square if legacy admission is done away with. Like, listen to this. Sarah wants to go to Harvard, right? But she has really bad grades. But lucky for Sarah, she has a family who's donated hundreds and thousands of dollars to Harvard, which means that Sarah would get accepted into Harvard based off a legacy admission rather than the merit of her grades. So if Supreme Court struck down affirmative action because they say that it's racist to take that into account, but they haven't said anything about legacy admission. So according to a study done on Harvard a couple of years ago, 43% of admissions for white students was based off of legacy admission, guys. That's how unfair legacy admissions is. So let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Otherwise, let's proceed to the rest of this video.
So true. So let's look at the actual data. So after the lawsuit challenging Harvard's admissions practices was filed, researchers dug into legacy and athlete preferences in Harvard's admissions process. For those interested, they also analyzed some of the factors that Harvard used in its admissions processes. A lot of you in the comments on part 1 were noting the importance of extracurriculars, and here you can see that is very important. These are the factors. So it's an overall rating, an academic rating, an extracurricular rating, an athletic rating, a personal rating, and a school support rating. Of course, there's other things that go into the process as well. Using publicly available data, this study concluded that 43% of white admits are either athletes, legacies, or related to donors or staff of Harvard. Read the stunning last line. Removing preferences for athletes and legacies would significantly alter the racial distribution of admitted students, with the share of white admits falling and all other groups rising or remaining unchanged. The takeaway from that is that white students are getting the benefit from this process. But I guess that conclusion doesn't fit with Fox News' narrative.
In conclusion, guys, the craziest part about legacy admission is that 75% of those students that went as legacies would have never, ever had a chance of getting into Harvard if they had not have had that connection to get in. So Harvard being the most talked about with legacy admissions, guys, just imagine how many Ivy Leagues of a high percentage of legacy admissions that no one wants to talk about. The next time someone wants to talk about affirmative action and how that's unfair, well, bring up legacy admissions because I personally think that is more unfair than affirmative action could ever be, guys. Please let me know what you think about this entire video in the comment section below. Please leave your own thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed, and I will definitely see you in my next video. Peace.